So what I plan to do is just work our way through the steps on the aid that I shared, and most of you got it anyway. So if you flick over the page, there's 14 steps there. What I thought we'd do is just go through those steps, and I'll literally just make up a case study as we go along. Nice, simple case study, so we see where it goes on the charts. But please, at any stage, let's pull up, let's have a chat, let's discuss what we're doing, maybe your observations, maybe something different, and try and put as much relevant information into the plan as possible. So again, let's just follow me through this. I'll be flicking between the camera on the whiteboard and the camera on the table. I have had, this morning I had a little bit of problem with upload speeds, and I started becoming a bit intermittent, which again, I don't really know what to do apart from switch off and switch on again, which is a pain. So if I do start becoming intermittent again, give me a flag and say, Brian, tell me we did something. Is that okay for everybody? All good?
Brian, could I be doing my own plan as we're going, or would that be counterproductive?
Louis, I'd probably say throw in the questions. I mean, give it a try, but I think you've got a lot more complexity to fold in than I'm going to fold in on the case study.
Okay, I'll just stick with the case study.
I'll give you the recording, and then just use the recording and go through each of the steps, listen to us chatting, and then fill in your own. And please, at any stage, if you've got problems, issues, send me an email, shoot me a thing, and either we can have a chat on the phone, Zoom, or just have a quick chat on the email. So yeah, but I think that might work best, and then we can utilize the recording. So folks, so let's start off with the aid, and that pre-planning stuff is just so important. A lot of people, you put it off. It's a good quadrant 2 activity. We don't want to get into the office and do any planning, and then suddenly let's go and do it. And you leap into the office and try and get started. Take the time, hop on the bike, hop on the side-by-side, hop in the ute, go take a paper and pencil and just go through each of your paddocks. And literally just turn the engine off, sit there quietly for a few minutes and ask yourself, what do I need to do in this paddock? Or what's this paddock telling me? It might just be something like filling up around a trough or fixing a ball valve. It might be a bit of fencing. You might have some weed issues that you want to cater for, or some bare ground, or it might be whenever we put the sheep or cows in here, they flog the hell out of that side of the paddock and don't go to that side. But all that information is really valuable to have up front. So I can't stress, it doesn't matter whether it's growing season or non-growing season, just getting out there quietly in the paddock for a few minutes with a paper and pencil. It's a great opportunity to take the rest of your team out as well. So your partner, your assistant, your kids, whatever it is, who help you on the property, because often they see things that you don't. They might have seen weeds, they might have seen a broken fence or something like that. And if they can have input there and buy-in, again, it just makes things so much easier down the track. So, I really strongly recommend just take that quiet time and go and do that with a paper and pencil, and just make a note of all that needs requiring. Okay. So that's the pre-planning step. So let's step straight into step 1, which is setting up the chart. Okay, I'll just flick down to the grazing chart here so we can all see what's happening down there. All see that one all right? Excellent. Okay, so the grazing chart, broken into months. If you don't have enough months on the chart for the area you're planning for, really easy, just cut and paste, stick some more on. This particular chart has 5, 10, 15, 20 paddocks, 20 rows. Each row is a paddock or an area. If you have more than 20, just cut and paste. Or I think I've got charts now with 38 paddocks, and they're quite nice because they actually go into, I think it's an A1, so you can do 2 charts and just cut them in half. So get the size of chart that works for you. But that first step is all about setting up your grazing chart. And the first thing, put in the year. I just can't tell you how many times I've had my grazing charts all over the floor, all over the dining room table, looking at stuff, trying to figure things out. And then you come to put them back in sequence, And if you haven't taken a moment to put the year down there that you're planning for, it's really hard. And a couple of times, as I said, I've had a whirlwind through the house and it's just taken them all off the bathroom door, scattered them all over the house. And again, without that date there, it's really hard to put them back in sequence. Again, the season, so we're looking for you guys non-growing. And again, so this planning process works wherever you are. You know, often with like the Byron Bay, Coffs Harbour folks, they say, well, listen, we don't really have a non-growing season. You know, it's growing all the time, which is fine. So they work on the growing season. I would have mentioned that fellow in Namibia who had 11 mils of rain last year. You know, Pete, he probably has a month of growing season, and then very quickly it becomes non-growing. So this process, the sheets work wherever you are on the planet. Okay, if you're managing animals and pasture plants, the sheet will work for you. So non-growing, the next little thing we need to fill in is our unit of land. Now again, you know, if you've got a farm and let's say half the farm you're running cattle and half the farm you're running sheep, well then you'll need two of these sheets, two plans, one for the cows, one for the sheep. If your cows and sheep are all mixed together or they follow each other and they all eat from all the paddocks, then you only need one plan. You know, if you own 2 or 3 properties, but your animals work their way through all 3 of them, you'd only need one sheet. So the sheet is for a unit of land being managed as one. So in this case, you know, just case study, I'll put down farm A. Okay, the next thing we need to look at is the months we're planning for. So let's kick off with, you know, we're almost in December, so let's start off with December. I think everything's still pretty green at the moment. January, February. When do you reckon growth starts for you again, Louis? You're going to have to unmute yourself. Sorry.
Sorry. Okay. I generally work to the 1st of July. We should expect without drought reserve. 1st of July, we should have grass, should have green grass. Okay.
And then a couple of months drought reserve on top. Yep.
Yes.
Yeah. Pete, what do you reckon you would plan for a non-growing season down where you are?
When did my last shot? I ended up in May. End of May.
Yep. Okay. Fantastic. So again, you know, as many months as you need. For this little case study, I'm going to say, you know, by the end of February, we sort of expect some rain. And to make it nice and easy, we'll put on March as our drought reserve. Now, again, I really encourage putting those brackets up there just to highlight that we're actually planning for 2 periods. We're planning for a non-growing period, and then we're planning for a drought period. And we do treat them as 2 separate periods. You know, we make sure we leave enough grass in each paddock to enable us to go around and clean it up in the drought reserve. So again, just putting that up there highlights to the fact that we're going to be planning for the non-growing, and then we'll plan for the drought reserve if the rains don't come when we expect them. The next little thing is to go through, and you'll all be aware that, you know, each of these months has 31 individual little columns. So you can go through and just take out the months that don't have 31 days. So, you know, February, let's say February for this case study has only got 28 days. So we'll take out 3 days there. March has got 31, January's got 31, December's got 31. Another little area where people get a bit trapped is these slightly darker lines here. Don't demarcate weeks. They're 5-day periods or pentades. And the sole purpose is to allow you to count across easier. So if you want to figure out when, let's say when Australia Day is, you know, 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, bingo, there you've got Australia Day. So these darker lines just help us count, and it's easier to count in 5s, I suppose. So our next step in setting up the chart is to put in the paddock names or numbers. And so for a little case study, let's go with 6 paddocks. Okay. And, you know, I really encourage folks to move to numbers as quickly as possible. You know, it's great having paddock names and they've got a history and they've got a story and they tell you exactly where they are, kind of thing. But when you start subdividing as you guys are, by the time you've subdivided and you've got Bob's back, ball, left, front, heel, two, whatever it is, it becomes really laborious for labeling paddocks. So, you know, Bob's back 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 to 100 if you want. So I'd suggest get onto the numbers as quickly as you can. To the left of column 3, we've got the size of paddocks. And again, I'm going to make this nice and easy by having nice round numbers. But, you know, Google Earth, phone apps and what have you, we can get some really good paddock sizes, because obviously paddock size and the quality of the feed are going to determine how long animals spend in the paddock. So we can total that up. So that's 130. So just for this little case study, there's the total area of land we're going to be planning for, just 130 hectares. And we got 6 paddocks. Okay. And that's really step 1, setting up the chart. Okay. Looking at the big picture, the seasonal stuff, and then paddocks and paddock sizes. So let's move on to over the page to step 2. And you'll know from any way we've talked before, any process that's truly holistic in the way it's designed starts big picture and works down to the thing we have most control over. You know, whether it's succession planning, financial planning, grazing planning, holistic stuff always starts big and then works down. Starts with the stuff you have least control over and then works its way down to the things, you know, in grazing planning, what do we have most control over? It's where we plan to have the animals in a certain place on a particular day. It may not work out that way, but we can plan to have them there. Okay, so anything holistic, you'll see that. So we start off the grazing planning, asking ourselves, what are the big picture events that are going to impact this grazing chart? You know, things like calving, lambing, kidding, frosts, public holidays, all those big picture things that it doesn't really matter where you are or where the animals are, these things are going to happen. And, you know, sometimes people argue and say, oh, well, yeah, public holidays don't really have an impact on me. I don't even know where they are. But if you wanted to include public holidays as part of your management, you know, a time when you can have friends to come out or a time when you take a break, get them down. And this is the step when we do that kind of thing. So if I flick back to our little case study here, I'm going to suggest let's start off with, okay, let's make this a little cattle exercise. And I'm going to suggest we're just finishing calving. Let's say we've got another 16 days of calving. So it's 5, 10, 15, 16. We've got another 16 days of calving left. And that's the way you'd mark it in on the chart. Now, can you see that all right, folks? You can? Fantastic. Okay. Now, again, down the bottom of the chart where this remarks area is, use this as your key. And just make a note of what that color is. Because again, you know, 10, 20, 30 years time, you'll be coming back here and saying, what the hell was that? And so use the bottom area there as a key. You might be saying, okay, well, if we're calving then, when are we going to be joining? And let's say you're running a 60-day joining. So we're probably going to start joining middle of February there. Try another pen. And again, these colors, use fairly light colors because you know you're going to be writing over the top of them again. Down the bottom here, again, let's put in joining. Other big picture items, as I said, you know, holidays. So here we got Christmas, 5, 10, 15, 20, 25. So 24, 25, here's Christmas. Now, I really strongly suggest don't write on the chart itself. keep the chart as free from writing as possible because it does get a bit messy. Up at the top here for this, you can write Christmas. What are the holidays we've got? We've got January the 1st, New Year's Day. Certainly don't want to be out in the paddock in 42 degrees doing fencing with a hangover on New Year's Day. So let's plan for that. Otherwise, it just might happen. We said Australia Day, 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 26. Here's Australia Day. And again, you might want to be down at the club playing cricket with the team rather than up in the paddock covered in cow poo in the yards. The other things I've again strongly suggest, those social things like I always joke, but it was absolutely true. I used to forget my wedding anniversaries until I started putting them on the grazing chart. And again, so when's the wedding anniversary? Say towards the end of January somewhere. No, it's more likely March for us. So let's say the 4th of March is our wedding anniversary. You might have a couple of birthdays you want to throw in there. So again, where do you want to be on your kid's birthday? Do you want to be out there doing stuff, or would you rather be down at the creek having a picnic with them or something like that? So even if you think this isn't important to the planning, it's important to your whole as a manager. So get those things down. Another thing folks often put down, and I'd certainly encourage this, is your sale dates. So if you know when the local sale is going to have a sale, pop that down. Because again, it's going to have a big impact as to, you might want to put the animals through the yards to get them to a sale. So you might say, the sale date is the last Monday of the month. And again, we can put the sale dates in, different color. And we can now plan towards having the animals at the right place, next to the yards at the right time, just before the sale, once we put those things in. So these are all big picture items. They're going to happen regardless of where you are, where the stock are. You might want to put yourself in for a little holiday. Let's say you want to go away for a week around your wedding anniversary. So we'll pencil that in. What does it mean? Well, we don't want to move cattle. We want the cattle in a place that has good water, etc., etc. So we can stencil in a week away. And don't forget down the bottom here, put in that little key so you can come back to it in a year's time and know exactly what you're talking about. So those are the kind of big picture events that we start off doing the planning. Start off big picture and then work our way down. So step 3 is record herd information. Okay, and this is where we take note of what animals you normally carry, what animals you're planning to carry in through this period. We'll then step in and do the feed budget and match our stocking rate to carrying capacity. But at this point, we're just taking a note of what animals you traditionally carry through the area. If you don't have that data because you've just bought the property or just adjusted the property, whatever it is, you could go and ask the previous owner. You might get a bit of a biased shot at that one. But you could go and ask the other neighbours. Eventually, you end up at council or catchment management, and they'd give you some indication of what kind of animals you can run on it. If you haven't got a handle on going out and doing feed budgets and what have you. So that information, and a lot of people carry that around, in a separate book or whatever. But having it on the chart is just so useful. So it's all there, all together. We can see where the animals are and how many animals are in the mob. So for this little case study again, let's just say we've got we have a bull being a cow herd. So let's just say we've got one bull. Okay, average weight 700 kgs. Now the percentage unit, we can get really precise with this, and obviously if you're trading and focused on production, you'd probably want to. So I would have shared with you Pender's tables in class. And again, please, if you've misplaced any of this stuff or you haven't seen it before, drop me an email. I'll flick you a copy if you've lost it or whatever. So Pender's tables, this is for growing animals. So down here we have the weight of the animal. Okay, so this one goes from 200 to 750. And then depending on how much you plan for that animal to gain from 0 to 250 grams, 500 grams, 750 grams, etc., etc. I think I've seen them going up to 2.5 kgs now a day. You can find out what percentage unit that animal is. Okay, so most people tend to work in animal units because, again, it simplifies the complexity. So standard animal units generally are for cattle, and the standard unit is a dry cow, 450 kg dry cow. Sheep, of course, is DSE, and that's a 50 kg merino dry ewe. So when we look at our bull here, you probably won't be able to see this, but I got our DS 700 is down the bottom of the chart. Now, if he's just maintaining, he's a 1.5 or 1.46. I'd call him a 1.5 units. Okay, and then as he puts on more weight, he gets up to a 2. He gets up to 2.5 over here. So the bigger the animal, or the more you're expecting it to gain, obviously, the more feed you've got to give it. So I'm just going to suggest for this little case study, let's say our bull at 700 is gaining half a kg a day. So we're going to put him down as it's a 1.83 here. I'm just going to round that off and give it a 2. Rather be on the safe side. Okay, so we've got one bull and he's going to be eating 2 units of feed. So his total number of units is 2. So just touch base on that. You know, when we talk about animal units of feed. Now, if you go back to the science says, you know, a dry cow will eat about 11.2 kgs of dry matter. That's a 450 kg dry cow. The bigger the cow, the more it's going to eat to maintain. If you want that cow to put on condition, you're going to have to feed it more. If that cow is pregnant, it's going to have to feed more. If it's lactating a calf, even more. So that's what these Pender's tables do for you. You know, I always liken, if you're running sheep, the old shopping bag. You know, if you can harvest green grass or dry grass, doesn't matter, put it in here and really pack it tight. Once, if it's green, you've dried it off, or if it's already dry, once you've packed it up, that should weigh roughly 1.2 kgs. So that's a sheep day. So, you know, when we talk about a sheep unit, that's a sheep unit of feed. And if you've got a sheep with twins, lactating twins, it's going to need 2.5 bags to perform. You know, if it's just a dry sheep, it's 1 bag. And then we go back to the same with cows. I would have shown you the old chaff bag. It's still doing the rounds. So, you know, your standard chaff bag. If you go out and paddock and harvest that full of dry grass and really pack it tightly, it'll come up between 10 and 11 kgs, which is what your standard 450 kg dry cow will consume. Obviously, if that cow's you know, got a big lump of calf on it, it might be up there 2 bags, or being able to select over two bags worth of area of ground. So there are lots of different ways of looking at that. I often just say to folks, let's just simplify it. If you're doing cows, a cow is a 1. A cow and a calf is a 1.5. Okay. If you've got a big bull, it's a 2. If you've got a big bull and a calf, it's a 2. If you've got a weaner, it's a 1. And you know, that just simplifies it nice and easy for most folks. And that's more than enough complexity. And again, you can do the same thing with sheep. Justin.
This is like a knowledge concern. Being a non-farmer, for me, one of the biggest questions I've got is how to estimate the quality of feed. Right. I mean, you've given us an idea of quantity, but like going out onto my paddocks, especially when it's just cape weed or whatever like that. I went out with Cody and he says, oh, yeah, there's virtually no feed there. And I thought, oh, well, that's surprising. I thought there's something there. But obviously, you know, how do you assess? I mean, this is where experience comes in, I'm sure. Are there any other guides to, rather than just the volume, to indicate what the quality of feed is?
Yeah. You know, you can run bricks meters, but those are going to vary between plants. You know, at the end of the day, it's getting that experience. And whether you lean over the fence and have a chat to your neighbor and say, you know, how many animals would you put in there for a day? Or, you know, to me, that's where, you know, you can go to, I mean, all those grazing toys like the ruler, you know, it doesn't tell you anything about quality. Okay. Some of the more visual ones. So these are produced by a lot of the LLSs and CMAs. So here we got Darling Downs, bluegrass country. So you got your ruler giving you an indication of the volume of feed and the density, and then they'll give you again just here they'll just give you kgs, but it doesn't actually tell you the value of that feed. You know, is it good feed or bad feed? And so even if you don't know, if you're not sure, then success lies in monitoring. So I always try and encourage people to think, this is holistic thinking. We make a plan, it's going to be wrong. 90% of the time it's going to be wrong. So success really lies in monitoring and control. So, if you don't have a clue, but you can say, well, I think I could put the animals in there for 10 days, or I think the animal performance will be X, Y, and Z. As long as you monitor, within a couple of days, couple of weeks, you'll pick up which way you've erred, and then you can take the control measures and bring yourself back on track. And again, appreciate, your farm will be different to your neighbors, but that's probably the closest place you can get some information. Yeah. Anybody Louis, you got any thoughts, or Peter, any thoughts on how do you figure out quality?
Well, I'm sort of facing the same problem. I've got paddocks of wild oats and what have you halfway up their sides of the cows, but they won't eat it. They just go through the paddock and pick out the clover, pick out the oats that came up from the hay that was rolled out during the summer. And so there's vast parts of the paddock that are just not touched.
Yeah.
And so that becomes a problem in trying to, sure that you get a little bit of knockdown when they walk through it and sit down and chew their cud and stuff. But the majority of the paddock's steaming tall. And very, very hard to determine exactly what feeds in that paddock. Yeah.
So if you came back a second time, they may eat it a bit better because their gut fauna would have changed, and also the type of animal and the breed of animal also has an impact on that kind of scenario. So the complexity there is monstrous. Louis, you were going to pop in?
Well, isn't it? We just estimate, and isn't it taken care of in column 2, the relative paddock quality?
Yep. So again, it's asking, how do we actually come up with a figure?
Yeah. Okay. So it's just, well, for me, it's just what Peter said. And you look at if you've got mainly wild oats, then they don't get as much off it. We've got a lot of flatweed at the moment, and it looks like great ground cover, but it's just it's a weed that has a diameter of leaves sitting on the ground that they can get nothing from
it. Yeah.
So just looking at, and for me, it's only comparison to the other paddocks on the farm. It's not comparison to anyone else's farm. Yeah. It's when we get to it, the rating your best paddock as a 1, and then everything else, this is only 50% of that good paddock, of that best paddock, or this one's only 20% of that good paddock.
Yep. So, Justin, you hear it there is, observation. Well, they only eat the oats, they only eat this. They won't eat the flatweed. So that's all coming from observation of what the animals are actually doing. Now, if you haven't had that experience, where can you find that kind of information? Getting in touch with folks like Louis and Peter and the group and saying, well, what do you think? And that's hugely valuable. At the end of the day, you end up at the local catchment or NNF or one of those groups, and again, they can only give you a very broad brush approach to it because your paddock, your farms are different. Yeah,
absolutely. Okay. And I think Louis, you hit the nail on the head there, Louis, when you talk about the relative estimating, because when in our agile world of software development, we talk about we're much better at relative estimating rather than absolute estimating. So once you have said, okay, this is the best part of land, and I'm thinking of my 20 hectares of hillside, I know there's one side of the hill facing east that's got the thickest grass on it. And so I'd say, okay, that's my best bit. And then there's other bits on the south side where there doesn't get too much sun, it's very sparse. That will be like, I can say, okay, there's probably only half the feed density on that compared to the other one. So at the end of the day, I suppose I can say, okay, I know that even though my cells might be, or my virtual paddocks, because I'm not going to do any fencing, might be equal size, I could probably need to allocate less time on the more shaded paddocks with the trees, more trees in them than the ones that are we've got more grass, and that's probably get me a little bit closer to my estimating.
And again, that's this little exercise with the chaff bag or the shopping bag. When you go out there and actually pull out the plants to put it in here, you're thinking, well, will my sheep eat that? Will my cow eat that? Well, if it's not going to eat it, it doesn't go in the bag. So again, you're making that visual assessment, and often just if it prickles in your hands or you can't actually pull it out, chances are your stock aren't going to eat it as well. So your hand and how easy it is to pull the bag becomes part of that monitoring. But we'll come back to feed assessment shortly. So let's keep on trucking with that one. So I'll flick back quickly to our little case study here. So for this little exercise, we've got a bull, 700 kgs. He's doing okay. We've given him a 2. Let's say we've got a little breeding herd happening. So we've got some cows. We say they're calving just at the end of their calving cycle. Make the numbers nice and easy. We've got 40 cows at 450 kgs. So if they weren't pregnant and weren't lactating, that'd be a unit of one bag. But we've said these guys are just at the end of calving, so they all have a calf on them. I'm going to give them a 1.5. Okay, so 40 by 1.5 is 60. So every day for our herd, we've got to provide 62 bags or 62 units of feed. Now, you might have kangaroos on the place. Now, if we don't factor in kangaroos into the plan, they will be eating into your reserve, and the chances are you'll run out of food. Now, how do you estimate the number of kangaroos? Well, just give it a stab. At the end of the day, having a guess is better than not guessing at all. So you might say, well, I've got 100 kangaroos. 100 kangaroos is going to eat the same as about 11 cows. So you can put in here kangaroos, 100, they're about a 0.1. There's your 11 cows worth of feed. And I gave you those comparisons. If you've got chickens, 160 chickens eats the same as a cow, and 90 rabbits. And so, the scientists have gone out there and done the research, and somewhere between 2.5% and 3.5% of body weight is what an animal eats in a day. And so you can factor in. So I'm not going to worry about that for this little exercise, but appreciate that's for this month. Okay. The next month, your bull's gaining 0.5 kg a day. So it's now going to be 715 kilograms. It's going to need slightly more feed. Your cows with a calf on, they might be a 1.6, and then a 1.7, and then a 2. And then the day you wean them, literally the cow drops back to a 1, and the weaner itself starts registering as a 0.5 or a 0.6. Okay. Again, let's say we've got some steers on board, and let's throw 40 steers out there. We go back to the Pender's tables, they're doing pretty well, so we give them a 1.5. So that'll be, again, 60. So now we've got, excluding kangaroos, we're not catering for kangaroos on this one, we've got 122 animal units. So we've got to make sure there's enough feed for 122 units for December. And obviously, as those animals get bigger, as the calves get bigger, we need to cater for an increase. Okay. So, you can make it nice and simple and just talk animal days. Or, if you really want to focus on productivity, we can go with the science and break it down to, DSEs and LSUs. And I'm just looking for that sheep Pender's table thing that I had. Again, if you're short of those sheets, please give us a shout. Oh, I've done another sheep one. Oh, there we go. So there's the sheep Pender's tables. So there's your merinos, 50 kg dry merino is a unit of 1. If it's pregnant, it's a 1.2 for singles, 1.4 or 1.5 for twins. And then when it starts lactating, we're up to 2.4 and 3.4. So it's going to have access to 3.4 shopping bags or areas of ground to be productive with twins when lactating. So please shout if you want copies of those. So all of that information goes down in rows 29 to 34, and we put the totals in 34 for each month to give us an idea. Now, obviously, once we go out and measure the feed in the paddock, we may come in and make these adjustments. So again, this kind of information, keep it in pencil because you might find you're overstocked. You're going to have to come back and sort that out. So normally this planning process happens like you guys are doing now before the grass has actually stopped growing. So you allow for a bit of leeway there.
Brian, can I just ask something on the Penderris tables?
Yes.
With sheep, I've recently gotten into sheep, and on the Penderris tables, a lactating ewe with just a single lamb is a 2.47. So she's gone to 2.5 times what a dry sheep would require.
Yep.
The cattle don't do anything like that. A lactating cow goes to 1.6.
Yep.
Is that so? When a lamb is weaned, does that sheep then go back to a 1? And the lamb comes on at like 0.5. So we've got a total of 1.5. When she's lactating, she's actually 2.5.
Okay. Again, it'll have a lot to do with how quickly and how easily those animals convert the kind of feed they're eating into milk.
Yes.
So that's going to be different for every animal certainly, but certainly within breeds as well. So how quickly do they? So horses are appalling, and you can see that by their dung. In terms of they can take in really good feed, but they actually don't break it down because they don't have stomachs like the other animals have. They don't have that same biology.
The ewe and the lamb, when she's lactating, they're combined 2.47 or say 2.5 units.
Yep.
But as soon as we wean that lamb, the ewe is back to 1 and the lamb's at a 0.5. So combined they're like a 1.5.
Yeah. So for that sheep to make milk, it's utilizing a lot more of that energy and nutrition out of the grass itself to produce milk. It's not as efficient as a cow.
Okay. But then presumably the growth rate for the lamb is higher when it's on its mother than when you wean it.
I would assume so, yes. Yeah.
And that's okay. So they're 2.5 units between them when she's feeding it, but they're only 1.5 between them the day that you wean them.
Yep.
Okay. So why do people wean early? Anyway, I guess that's a bigger conversation than this.
Yeah.
It's just.
Again, not having a lot of experience with sheep, certainly with cattle, you'd wean early, like if you're heading into a drought, and you certainly wean to try and get the cows back into condition to cycle. And I would imagine it's pretty much the same as sheep.
Okay. It's weaning to get them back into condition to cycle. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Good. So let's move on to the next step, which is record livestock exclusion period. So again, going back to what I was talking about before, any process that's holistic starts big picture, things we have no control over. Now we're getting down to step 4, which is recording livestock exclusion periods. So it's paddocks or groups of paddocks that for whatever reason you can't have stock in. Okay, so we have a little bit of control around this, but not much. So it's the next step down. So, what exclusion periods? Could be you sprayed a paddock, it's got a withholding period. Could be the fencing's buggered, so you can't put the animals in there for the moment. There might be noxious plants in there. You might have planted a crop. A whole range of reasons why you don't want to graze a paddock for a particular period of time. So where do we put that on the chart? And again, I'll just thumbsuck a few things to put on here. Let's suggest we've got a paddock that we want to harvest some seed. So let's go with paddock 4. We want it to dry off correctly so we can harvest some seed. We'll do that after New Year, I think. So again, because these are exclusions, we can actually use quite dark shading because we don't want the animals in there, to allow that seed to dry off, and then we can harvest it in January. And then don't forget down the bottom here, seed harvest. What else might constitute a withholding or an exclusion? Let's say, paddock 1, the piping's buggered, the trough's buggered, we have to replace it. Probably not going to get around to that until early January. So let's say we've got a contractor coming in with a digger to put in the trough. So that's going to happen middle of January. But in the meantime, there's no water. So just mark it across there. So paddock 1, there's no water. We can't graze it there. Contractor's going to come in. We're going to put the trough in between the 10th and 15th of January, and then we can start grazing. So these again are exclusion periods when we don't want animals in a paddock for a particular reason. No water, trough. Okay, what else can we put in there? We might say we want to put in a pasture crop for the start of next season. So let's say we're going to run, I'll use some blue for this. Again, maybe we've got a contractor coming in, and paddock 6, which is a beautiful big paddock. It's 40 hectares. It's a great paddock. We're going to be sowing some more seed in there, and the contractor reckons he can come and dry sow, let's say the first 2 weeks, 14 days, 15 days of February. And again, so we certainly don't want the stock in there when the contractor's in there with his rig putting out some seed. Again, don't forget down the bottom here, let's put in the index sowing. Okay, so exclusion periods, periods that you can't put animals in a paddock for a particular reason. Spraying, chemicals, withholding periods, all that kind of stuff is going to come into this category. It might be that you have some clover that you really want to come up to seed, and then you can get in and graze it and take it to another paddock. So you might have, let's exclude stock from that paddock for the 2 months or whatever it is to get the clover to come through. Then we can graze it and shift it to another paddock. Step 5, nice and easy, record paddocks still available. Now, I would have said to you, in class, where it says there, and if you look at step 5, if you have it in front of you, it says in row 26 under each month. I would have asked you in class to scrub out under each month, because this we don't do monthly, we do it for the period. So we do it for the growing and the non-growing, non-growing and the drought, my apologies. So step 5, record the number of paddocks available. And we record that here in row 26. It says paddocks available. And we're looking at our non-growing period. Now, this paddock's not available here. This paddock's not available here. This paddock's, but either side, they're available. So sometime in the period, these paddocks are available. So looking at that, I'm going to say all 6 paddocks are available sometime within this period. When we look at our drought period, again, all the paddocks are available sometime in the drought period. So again, we'll give it a 6. Now, you'll appreciate that the more paddocks you have available, the shorter the graze period, the longer the recovery period. Now, we're not talking recovery of plants, but we're talking worms, wearing off of dung and urine, all of that kind of stuff. So, you know, the longer the recovery period, even though we're not talking recovery of plants, there's a huge advantage, okay? But you'd also appreciate the more paddocks available you have, the more you're able to manipulate, you know, when you start looking how you're going to get animals from one paddock to the next or back to the yards, the more paddocks you have, the easier it is to manipulate all those factors. So try and be as inclusive as you can. So even if, you know, the paddock was out for just about this whole period, but you think you could just squeeze a grazing in somewhere, treat it as available. The more paddocks, the better. The higher the impact, all of those things come into play. Just
Brian, it's a really interesting question or statement you make, because with the exploration of virtual fencing that I'm looking at is that for Gallagher's and for the technology they're using, the battery life goes up, battery consumption goes up on the devices, the animal management, the closer they are to the boundary. So one of their constraints is they want to keep the paddocks as large as possible to maintain battery life. So in terms of the grazing and keeping, you know, the animals bunched, the technology isn't actually suited to that mindset. So there's this trade-off between paddock size and battery life in the virtual fencing arrangement.
Or maybe we just need to go up to the gas score and get 1 million acres, and then you can have big size paddocks.
And 100,000 animals, yeah.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's a really interesting point you raised there, because, you know, the more subdivisions, the more paddocks you have, there's just, you know, the more impact you get, the more time to wear off. And then when you come into the grazing season, the more paddocks you have, the shorter the graze period in each individual paddock, which means you limit overgrazing.
Yeah,
so,
and what I hear repeatedly from people talking about their holistic planning so far is there's the constant thing that I couldn't get the animal density high enough to get the impact I wanted. That seems to be a very common issue that people have. Yeah,
and I think, you know, again, using smart fencing, your layouts, and trying to get those long skinny paddocks as opposed to big square round paddocks is a key function of that. But we can get animal impact by, you know, just throwing a hatful of pellets out. You know, so it doesn't have to be fencing all the time. We can do it with dogs. We can do it with, you know, licks. We can do it with all kinds of. I was on a place up at Grafton 4 weeks ago, and he had built himself a little free choice trailer with about 8 different tubs in it. Again, just 20 litre tubs in this little box trailer. He had a boss bag with the diatomaceous earth hanging over the back for buffalo fly. And, you know, he was just moving that into areas, bare ground, rushes, weeds, and, you know, getting fantastic impact around that, especially, you know, they just love that boss bag. The other interesting thing he was doing was recording which minerals they were eating most of, and he was recording it on his grazing chart. And what he was finding is certain paddocks, because, you know, all your paddocks have different plants in them, accessing different nutrients, different minerals, and he was finding huge changes between paddocks. And so he was making a note on his grazing chart that, you know, they ate more phosphate in this paddock and they ate more copper in this paddock and whatever. So, you know, for future planning, fantastic. You know, before they move into that, let's put an extra tub of copper in the trailer, or, you know, maybe we have to buy more copper. So again, it just helps with the planning process behind these things. And I thought, yeah, putting it on the trailer was really good, because also it becomes your record. So if you find, you know, they need copper now, but in 3 years' time they don't need copper, what's changed? You know, have you got a diversity of plants? Is your mineral cycle functioning? It'll be a good monitoring tool. So yeah, paddocks still available, and then we step into step 6. And step 6, now we're working our way down that funnel. We're now in paddocks that require special attention. So, you know, if you've taken that little bit of time to drive around your paddocks and make a note of what you've seen there, this is where you fold in that information. You know, you might have seen weeds here, bare ground there, all kinds of things. There might be wildlife issues. You might have dingoes in the forestry, next to the forestry paddock, trough issues, fencing issues, all of those things. Now, this is the step that you fold it in. So pretty similar, we just fold it in, and I'm going to be putting in, you might say we've got a weed problem, and we could just use a green pen like this and say, right, paddock 2, we have this weed issue, and we're going to mark it in just with a wavy line. So whenever the animals are in that paddock, we've got a weed issue. What are we going to do about it? Well, it might be that you want to spray it. So once we know when we're going to graze it, and let's say it's got a withholding period of a month, you'd have to spray it a month before you plan to graze it. You might want to spray it after you've grazed it. So you've got it all down to the ground, and when it just starts sticking its little heads through the soil, you can then hammer it with a chemical and hopefully use less chemical. Or you might just want to put some hay down there or some temporary fencing or whatever it is. So just by marking it on your grazing chart, with this line, then allows us to fold in the management, whatever management you plan around that weed issue.
Brian?
Yeah.
If I can jump in there.
Peter, yeah.
I try and use my stock to remove material around my facilities and house, etc., as a fire protection to try and remove feed.
Fantastic. Yep.
So
Peter, this would come in now.
Yeah.
Which paddocks around the house, let's say 1 and 2, and excuse me, this is what we call an inclusion period. Yep. So we actually want the animals in a paddock. And I always recommend, shading in with a pencil, because you're going to put a graze period over this. So, let's have a look at our little plan here. I said paddock 6 was our best paddock. So let's say we really want to go in and graze paddock 6 early here, because the stock aren't going to need a lot of moving when they've got these young calves. So if paddock 6 is really our best paddock, plus it's a big paddock, this is going to be a really good place to have, cows and young calves where we're not moving them great distances. You might say to yourself, let's say you've got a weed issue, and the weed issue maybe here in, let's go paddock 4 maybe. Paddock 4. Let's say we've got a weed issue in paddock 4, and that weed tends to come up just before the rains come. So that's the first green thing in the paddock. And if we can go in and graze it then, we'll reduce the amount of weed in the paddock. Okay. And again, just by shading it in with a pencil like that, it's highlighting that, we want the stock to be there sometime around that period. Like your fire, you might want to do fire breaks on paddocks. When does that need to happen? Before the lightning strikes, start those wildfires. So this is the step when we start including when we want the animals in the paddock for a particular reason. Remember, planned grazing is all about getting your animals to the right place at the right time and for the right reasons. So let's flick over the page and we hit to step 7. Okay, so step 7 is where we often get bogged down. It's about rating paddock productivity. I loved what you said earlier, Justin, about, just easiest way, just go out there, rate your best paddock at 10. And if I said to probably 99% of livestock managers, which is your best paddock, they'd be able to give me an answer. And if you said to them, okay, what's the thinking behind your best paddock? In your mind, you're thinking both size and quality of feed. And the quality of the feed is a really difficult one, unless you've actually observed and seen what they like. But the size is easy, Google, phone, all kinds of things. So, but in your mind, that's what you're thinking. So to me, the easiest way of doing this is, which paddock would you leave your animals in for the longest? Bang, give it a 10. Then ask yourself, which paddock would you leave them in for the next longest? And most people have a think about that, and they'd come up with a paddock and say, right, is it 80% as good? Give it an 8. Is it 70% as good? Give it a 7. Is it half as good? Give it a 5. And you might have 3 or 4 5s. So you're not rating paddocks 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. You're rating with their potential against your best paddock. Okay. So, you know, if you haven't got time to go out and measure feed or do any of those things, to me, that's a really easy, simple way. And, you know, as long as you're monitoring, you'll pick up really quickly. So, you know, when we look at our Aide memoir here, the first part of this step talks about rating your paddocks out of 10. Once you've been doing this for a while, the gold standard is if you can go to column 8 of your previous plan and have a look what figures you got off there. And then to go one step even higher, and I encourage everybody to do this because at the end of the day, this is what we should be doing, is go out in your paddock and measure, do feed squares. You know, you can go out in your paddock and use the MLA ruler if that works for you, you know, just trying to measure how high the average is, but you end up having to do a lot of these. And you know, it might be the same species. It might be, you know, your oats, this plant, they only take down half, this plant, they take down all the way. And I don't know how many of us have good plants that only get that high. You know, they go up through the roof. So, you know, it's a tool. It has its limitations. You know, I showed you these pictures earlier. That's the growing season. You know, those would give you an indication of how many kgs a hectare might be in your paddocks. But to me, just going out there, you know, with a bag for sheep or a chaff bag for cows and just pacing out a square and saying, you know, would I put one of my cows or sheep in that square for a day? And you'll become really, really accurate and quick in assessing. You know, and that's what these pictures do, really. You know, for people who haven't yet got the experience, looks like that. That's how many kgs a hectare you've got. But once you know your country, the plants in your country, and you've also got a past history on it, it's great to be able to just get out in the paddock and do a couple of feed squares. And what I find generally is people don't make a mistake with a feed square. Not a big mistake. People make a mistake where they choose to do the feed square. So, you know, we always say go and choose an average patch in the paddock to do your feed assessment. And that's where people tend to go wrong. They either favor a better patch or go to a worse patch. So again, you know, if you've got a paddock that's quite diverse, you know, go out there and do five feed squares. You know, it's not going to take you a long time. It doesn't require any sort of technology or anything like that. So once you've got the feed square, and I'll just quickly do this on paper. So, you know, you've got your paddock. You go out there and do a feed square, and you know that's going to be one animal day of feed in that little area there. You know the area of the feed square, you know the area of the paddock. Divide the area of the paddock by the area of the feed square, you can get how many animal days of feed or bags of feed in the whole paddock. You know, it's a pretty simple formula. So that little calculator I shipped out to you, Bruce Ward's little calculator, just does all the maths for us. But you know, if we went in here and I said to you, oh, paddock one on a little case study here. So paddock one, let's say we go into paddock one and our feed square, we place 10 meters by 10 meters. That will feed one animal. And whether it's a sheep or a cow, it doesn't matter. I'm working in animal days. You know, if you want to, you could say that's an SAU or a D or C. I'm just saying it's an animal. Okay, so that's 10 tens or 100 square meters for one animal day. To feed one animal for one day. Okay, so what's a hectare? A hectare is 100 meters by 100 meters, is 10,000 square meters. So if one animal needs 100 square meters, we divide 10,000 by 100 and we get 100 animal days of feed per hectare. How big is a hectare? You've got 10 hectares, you've got 1,000 animal days of feed. You know, it's literally that easy. And, you know, be a little bit generous on your feed square. You know, don't try and squeeze it. But as long as you're consistent, you'll get a good answer out of it. So that's how easy it can be. Just walk out in the paddock, pace it out. You know, your pacing might be 15 by 15. 15 15's 225. 10,000 divided by 225 is 44, I think. Yep. 44 animal days per hectare. So you can put 44 animals in a hectare for 1 day. Or if you've got 10 hectares, 440 animals. So it's very simple maths. That little calculator will help you. So I think probably a good time to go across to the calculator. So I'll just share screen at this point.
I find they soon tell you, the cattle will soon tell you if you're wrong, Brian.
Yep. And that comes back to, that comes back to this stuff.
Yep.
You know, you can make all the best plans in the world, but tomorrow they're probably the worst plans. So as long as you monitor the cattle, they'll tell you, or the sheep or the animals, they'll tell you, whether you're being generous or not. Everybody see the screen I'm sharing? Fantastic. So I would have shared this with you, Peter. I don't know if you've seen this one. It was developed by Bruce Ward way back, and it's just, it's just a nice, simple Excel program. So let's just start off down the bottom here with the feed squares, because that's what I really encourage people to do. So we've worked out how many days of non-growth for this little case study. It was December, January, February, which was 90 days. And we know how many days of drought reserve we want. That was the month of March, which was 31. So we put the figures 90 and 31. In this little program, which I'll share with you, Peter, just wherever it's yellow, Bruce wanted some input from you. For this little case study, we've only got 6 paddocks, so we've got 1 to 6. Okay, we've put in the size of the paddock. And then over on the left-hand side here, sorry, I've got the wrong one, haven't I? Yes, I have. Okay, same data, 9 and 30, numbers of the paddocks, paddock sizes, and over on the left-hand side here, we've put in the size of the side of the square to feed 1 animal per day. So paddock 1, it's 10 meters by 10 meters, or 10 paces by 10 paces. Paddock 2, slightly less productive, 15 by 15. Paddock 3 is fantastic paddock. It's a 5 meter by 5 meter to feed an animal. Paddock 5 there, you'll see it's 20 meters by 20 meters. So that's our poorest paddock. And then paddock 6, which is our beautiful flat pasture improved country. Again, we're back to a 5 meter by 5 meter. So this little calculator will automatically work out the number of animal days of feed per hectare, and then multiply the hectare to give you the total number of animal days of feed on the whole property. So just doing those little simple sums, we can then go across to our grazing chart. And over on the right-hand side, now, column 4 here, it says minimum and maximum. Let's just cross that out and write non-growing. That's where we're going to put the non-growing figures. And the empty box next door we'll call drought. So paddock 5, column 5, asks us to put in the estimated animal days per hectare or acre, depending on which one you were using, or the total number of animal days for the paddock. So let's assume we've gone out there, we've done the measurements. So, paddock 1 was 10 by 10, and it's 10 hectares. So that gave us 1,000 animal days. Paddock 2 was probably our worst paddock. No, not quite. It was 15 meters by 15 meters, which is 44 animal days per hectare. It's 10 hectares, so that's 440. And we can just work our way down here. That's 8,000. These are the same. They're all 1,000. And they're in our really good paddock. Oh, I've messed up there, haven't I? a really good paddock, which was paddock 6, which is a big paddock. It's 40 hectares, and we've said a 5 by 5 is going to feed one animal for 1 day. So I'll just pop back and do the maths on that one, just as to reiterate that. So paddock 6, we've said is 40 hectares. So paddock number 6 is 40 hectares. We've gone out there, we've done some feed squares, and we've said it's a fantastic paddock. 5 meters by 5 meters will feed one of our animals. And whether you're going sheep or DSCs, that's your choice. So 5 5s, 25 square meters equals 1 animal day, or 1 sheep day, or 1 cow day, whatever it is. Okay. So our hectare is 10,000 divided by 25, 400. We got that right. Yeah, 400 animal days per hectare. How big is our paddock 6? It's one of our biggest ones. It's 40 hectares. We multiply that by 40 hectares. It's going to give us 16,000 animal days to feed. Okay, so this is it's a nice flat bit of healthy country that we've been putting cover crops or something into it for a long time. It's a really productive paddock, but it is also one of our bigger paddocks. Okay, and we're choosing to put animals in there, especially when they've got calves, so we don't have to move them too far. Any thoughts, questions? Are we all okay with the math side of it? I mean, that little calculator is really, really easy and quick, but the maths is just laborious. It's the same equation that you just keep on churning out. I can go back quickly to that little program of Bruce's. So to me, getting out in the paddock and doing the feed squares is the best thing we could do. But, if you don't have time or you're not sure, you might just come across to the second tab down at the bottom and click that. And, what we've done here now is we've gone in and we've used our paddock rating system. So there's our days, 90 and 31. Here's the number of paddocks. Here's the paddock sizes. And we've literally said to ourselves, which paddock would we leave our animals in for the longest? Okay. So paddock 6, we've said, is our best paddock. It's the biggest one, but it's also really good quality. So we've given it a 10. And then you ask yourself, well, which is my next best paddock? And I've just put some figures in here, but you'd say, okay, well, paddock 3 is our next best paddock. Relative to paddock 6, paddock 6, you gave the 10, it's the best. Relative to that paddock, what would you give it? And I've given it a 6 because it's 60% as good. And then you just work your way through all your paddocks, giving it that relative figure. So this will give you, as long as you've been observant in the paddock, it'll give you some really good figures to get started with. Okay. I would encourage, get out in the paddock, do some pacing, ask yourself the question, would I put one of my animals in this square for a day? And again, great little exercise to take other members of the team out in the paddock and chat and share ideas. So I've now transferred this data here, 1,000. This is the number of animal days in the paddock. I've transferred that into column 6 on the grazing chart. So let's just step back there. Okay, so we've got some figures happening now. Let's move on to our next step. Feedback there.
Sorry about that.
No, you're right, Matt.
I lost connection.
We're still getting some feedback there. I was having some connection problems. Okay, so the next step on our Aide is plan the drought reserve. So we've already allocated the days for the drought reserve. In this little case study, we've said March. And we go down to the bottom right-hand side of our grazing chart, to this area here. And the first thing is estimated total number of animal days for the whole property. So here we go, we add these up. And the last one there was 16,000. And that gives us a total of 27,440 for this little case study. So we just add up column 6 and we put the total in there. That's the total number of animal days of feed on the whole property. How many days of non-growth? Again, we can go back to the chart. We can say 31, 31, 28. So that'll be our 90 days. Now, if we were bulk feeding, so the animals weren't having to eat out of the paddock, they were just eating out of a bag, we'd put the number of days of bulk feeding here. Because obviously, if they're eating out of a bag, they don't have to eat out of a reserve of 27,440 stock days. So in this little instance, we're not bulk feeding. Number of days of drought reserve, we said March, which was 31. So the total number of days required for grazing is that plus that minus that. So 90 plus 31 minus that. So we've got 121 days that we need to have feed available for our animals. So we know how much feed we've got. We now know how many days it's got to last for, including the drought reserve. So we divide that by that and we come up with 226 animal days of feed. So that's our carrying capacity. Okay. Our stocking rate at this time is 122.
Brian, as a sanity check, is there any way, like often the government makes recommendations about what your maximum stocking rate should be based on set stocking. Is that a good cross check for these things based on like assuming the animals in the paddock all year? Because I mean, that's also maybe sometimes a legislative requirement or a council requirement.
Yeah, I would say definitely not. Again, because they don't know how that paddock's been treated. They don't know if it's been, brought herbicide for the last 10 years before you bought it. If you can get out in the paddock and do that assessment, that'll be miles better than their assessment.
I wasn't thinking of actually using their assessment as the actual guide. What you're suggesting is obviously much more accurate, but in terms of a sanity check as a cross reference to say, okay, you wouldn't want to be wildly out of the ballpark if you're working on the average sort of landscape.
Justin, I'd say most of the time you will be wildly off the mark. But again, it wouldn't do any harm, put it that way.
Yeah.
And then, you go back to this idea of plan, monitor, control. You put the animals in there, let's see how they behave, because that's going to be, the real check of things. Yep.
Okay.
So again, we in this little exercise, we wildly understocked. Which I think is where most people are finding themselves right now. Now, what are you going to do about it? You could go out there and try and buy stock. You could sit tight and say, no, I'm just going to do what I can. But it becomes really important now in terms of grazing planning. When you look at holistic financial planning, your current weak link is you don't have enough animals. You're not getting enough production off that country. So there's absolutely no point in making animals stay a day longer in a paddock than they need to. If they've got good quality feed in front of them, there's no point in holding them in a paddock to knock down grass, to do all that kind of stuff when they've got fresh feed ahead of them. And your weak link is you're not producing product off the paddocks. So when it's in a situation like this now, you want your animals to be doing the best performance they possibly can while still, doing all the good stuff for the country. So, when I see figures like this, I say to myself, right, now's the time we've got to be really sharp and, we just make sure we don't hold the animals any longer than needs be in the paddock. Because that's just going to drop your animal performance for what? You've got so much feed, why make them eat poorer quality feed by making them stay longer in the paddock? Okay, so there's your check. Now, obviously, if it was the other way around, we only had 122 days of animal days of feed, and we had 226 animals. Well, now we can make a decision again. We can destock. We could find adjustment. We could, there are opportunities there for us again. So that's matching your carrying capacity to your stocking rate. And now comes a decision, what do we do to adjust it? So let's leave that as is for the moment. Let's just say too expensive. We're just going to make sure that our animals are going to be at peak performance. We're not going to make them eat anything that they don't need to eat at this step in time. Okay, so over the page, plan the number of selections and the average graze period. So again, we go down to row 27. And row 27 says recovery periods. Now, obviously, that's for the growing season. So we can cross out recovery periods. The number of selections. So the number of selections is the number of times during this period we're going to go through the paddocks. And there's good reasons for doing one. There's good reasons for doing more. So if we look at our little example here, if we're only going to take one selection, let's say we've got 90 days of non-growing, we're just going to take one selection in each paddock and then 90 days is up. Okay. Or you might say to yourself, well, let's take two selections. Now, if you take two selections, the idea is they'll come in, they'll eat the ice cream, 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 and then we come back and we eat a lower plane of nutrition. Okay. Now, often if there's a big difference between your good plane of nutrition, your low plane of nutrition, the gut flora has to change. Okay. Now, if they're trying to do that every time they're in a paddock because they eat the good stuff and the bad stuff together, that means a lot of change of gut flora. Whereas if you go around with one selection and then come back for the second selection, they only change their gut flora basically when you move them back into the paddock, the first paddock, to that second selection. Another good reason for taking more than one selection is if you think you might get some growth happening, in the non-growing period. If you get some rain and plants take off, because if you're only taking one selection, you've got the animals in here, you move them to there, you get some rain, you're not getting back to eat that grass again in the plan. So again, taking two selections is a good way of, if there's a chance that you're going to get some non-seasonal type growth, you can take advantage of it. Some people might, if they've got really long non-growing periods, 180 days, 200 days, they might take three selections. They'll go through their paddocks once, the animals will do really, really well. They might sell off a couple, go through a second time, take the next plan of nutrition. Now, when they come back for the third time, that's when they start adding a bit of supplementary feed, just to maintain that level of production when the pasture, now you've taken all the ice cream, it's gone. Okay, so number of selections, again, a really important step, and it's going to impact how long we spend in the paddock. So for our little case study here, I'm just going to suggest, just to make it easy, we'll just go with one. But I think most of you should probably be looking at two, unless you think you've got a really... Justin, how long do you think your non-growing period would be? Would it be as long as Louis and Peter's? You're on mute, no?
Yeah, I'd say my non-growing would be the same. Like I would be aiming for green grass. You can get the rain in April, but I'd be aiming for June as well, like Louis. Okay.
Fantastic. Yeah. I mean, if you had a really short non-growing period, a month or two, then obviously you wouldn't even worry about selections. You just go for one. But where you guys are, I'd be saying two. Louis, how many are you going to aim for?
Sorry, I just wanted to clarify something on what Justin just said. Justin, I do anticipate the rain coming at the end of April, but we haven't got green grass until the end of June.
Okay. Yeah.
But it's not that I'm not anticipating the rains to come until the end of June. There's a lag before we actually get green grass, particularly at that time of year because it's cold. So I generally anticipate the rain coming by the end of April, and we have green grass for the 1st of July. and then I'll have a drought reserve for 2 months after that.
So your drought reserve is actually going into July, August, September.
July and August, we'll definitely have good green grass by the, well, not definitely, but 99.9% of the time we'll have good green grass by the 1st of September. That's an absolute worst case, that drought reserve.
Okay.
Again, Louis, I would suspect, as you start improving soil cover, you start improving soil, you won't have that lag between April and June to get green plants. You'll have your rain in April, and I reckon within a couple of weeks you'll start seeing growth. But that'll come in time.
We definitely see growth, and we get the germination within a few days. But for the grass to actually get to a height where we're not still feeding the animals off the dry feed from the previous season, that's at least 6 weeks after the rain.
Yeah.
So wouldn't that also depend if you've got a lot of perennials coming up? They can respond much faster to the rain, couldn't they?
Absolutely true. I've got very few perennials at the moment.
No, fantastic. So again, hopefully those changes will happen, which will make, again, your productivity all over for a longer period of time, which would be fantastic.
So back to your question just then. Last year I went on 3 selections, and I believe it was too many. I'm looking at 2 this time.
Yeah, because often you still have some green plants out there in the paddock. Everything else might be dry, but in the bottoms of the gullies or around the creeks, there might be some green plants there. Now those can suffer from overgrazing. So you've got to ask yourself, let's say we've got 180 days of non-growing. If you took 2 selections, those plants will all have roughly 90 days to recover. Okay, 180 divided by 2 is 90.
Yes.
Okay? I mean, the bulk of your plants are dry, that they're not going to need it, but it's just those odd plants out there that are actually green and growing. If you then took 3 selections, those odd plants are only going to have 60 days of recovery, 2 months. Now, is that enough? And people now start saying, well, actually, no. So there's a good reason not to go to 3. Let's go to 2.
I see. Yes.
Yep. And maybe that's what you saw last year, or when you were doing 3. If there is something green out there, you can still overgraze it.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Let's keep on trucking. So I'm just catching up on the steps here. Number of selections, average graze periods. Right. So number of selections. Let's again make it nice and easy for this case study. Let's just go with 1. And generally in the drought, we only have 1. Your drought reserve is your worst tucker. So generally we only have 1 selection there. But if you had a really long drought reserve, like Pete Potgieter, who's sort of 9 months drought reserve, then I'd be saying maybe have 2. But generally we don't do that. So now we work out our average graze period. And the maths for the average graze period, again, pretty simple stuff. It's time divided by the number of paddocks. So for our average graze period is time divided by number of paddocks. Now, having come out of the growing season, you recall we minus the paddock they're in for the growing season, because obviously they're grazing those plants aren't recovering. Whereas for the non-growing season, it's all your paddocks that you're utilizing. So when we look at our non-growing period for the case study, we've said is December, January, February, 90 days is our time. And we're going to divide it by the number of paddocks, which is 6. Okay, so our average graze period is 1.5. Have I got that right? No, I haven't. Sorry, 15. I saw Justin's head going. 15 days on average. So if your paddocks were exactly the same size, same quality, same everything, we'd spend 15 days in each paddock, and the job would be done. Okay. Now, what about our drought reserve? Our drought reserve, our time was 31 days divided by 6 equals 5.12 or something days. So these two figures are our average graze period. So if all your paddocks were exactly the same size, we'd use 15 days to get through the non-growing and 5.12 to get through the drought reserve. These are your average graze periods. Okay, so assuming all your paddocks are exactly equal. Where do we put those on our grazing chart? Down there alongside row 28. So row 28, cross out this average minimum, average maximum. That's again for the growing season. We're focusing on our average graze period. So 90 divided by 6, we said was 15 days. And again, it's for this period. And for the drought period, we said 31 divided by 6 was 5.16, I think it was, for the period. Okay, so these are all the really important figures we've got so far. We've got our average graze periods, and we've got our paddock ratings in animal days. Now, one last thing we need to do before we get into working out actual graze periods is we need to add up all the paddock feed in the paddocks, which we've done, which is 27,440. This figure here in row A. So we added those up. We need to work out our average paddock rating. So we divide this figure, total number of feed, divided by the number of paddocks, to give us an average paddock rating, and that figure, which is 4,573, that goes in this little box at the bottom of column 6. And I'm going to put that in red because it's again an important figure. So now we've got 3 lots of figures. We've got our paddock rating individually. We've got our average paddock rating. Okay, and we got that by dividing this by the number of paddocks. And then we've got our average graze period in row 28, 15 for the non-growing and 5.16 for the growing season. Now we move on to our very next step on the grazing aid, and let's work out the actual graze periods. Okay, and the way we do that, let's get back to the whiteboard. Again, the maths is really simple. It's just pretty laborious. The way we do that is we take paddock 1. The paddock rating for paddock 1 in animal days, which is what we put in column 6, was 1,000. We multiply that by the average graze period of 15, and we divide it by the average graze period in the box at the bottom of the box at the bottom here, which was 4,537. That's our average paddock rating. Sorry, you can't see that, can you? So we divide that by 4, 5, 3. Okay. Now that'll give us, I've done the maths already, that'll give us 3.28 days. So paddock 1, to give our animals the best possible plan of nutrition, okay, they're going to spend 3.28 days in it. We can do the same again for the drought. So our paddock rating is not going to change. It's still 1,000 multiplied by 512. Divide by our average paddock rating at that little box at the bottom here. Isn't going to change. 4,573. And that's going to give us a figure of 1.13 days. So for the non-growing period, whenever we graze paddock 1, we'll spend 3.3 or maybe 3 days in it. And that'll leave us a day and a bit of feed for the drought reserve if we need it. Now, chances are you might get the rains when you expect them. In this case, the end of February, you know, in Louis' case, April. And then we may not need that drought reserve, but what have you wasted? Generally, it's your worst quality feed. So we do that for each paddock. So if we go to paddock 2, our paddock rating was, that's one of our, in fact, it's our poorest paddock. Our paddock rating was only 440 animal days per hectare. We multiply that by 15, divide by 4573, and the answer to that one was 1.4 days. So it's our poorest paddock. Obviously, we're going to spend as little as 1.4 days in there. We do the same for the drought. Our paddock rating hasn't changed, but we use 5.12 instead of the 1.5. Divide by 4573, and that gave us 0.5, half a day.
So at that point, Ryan, you probably wouldn't even bother running that through the drought reserve unless you got desperate.
Yeah, and it's got half a days of feed in there. Can you manage to move your animals that quickly, or is it just too much of a hassle? You might say, well, I'll just leave the gate open and graze 2 paddocks concurrently. That one, another one. Yeah. So again, just especially in the situation we're in at the moment, where animal performance and numbers of animals is generally the weak link. There'll be half a day of good quality feed in there. Why make them eat poorer quality feed in another paddock? If it's not too much of a hassle and you're available and all those other things. Okay, so the maths is just laborious. That little Excel spreadsheet I'm going to share with you is the way to go. Where do we put these figures? So heading back to our graze chart. Over here at paddock column 4. So we said for the non-growing season, paddock 1 was 3.28 and it was 1.13 for the drought. Paddock 2 was 1.44 and only 0.5. So again, Justin's point, do we waste our time with that, or just be aware that right now we're short of animals? And I've done it for the whole lot. So here we've got 26.24. So that's one of our better paddocks, and 9.03. These are all very much the same, 3.28, 3.28. 1.13, 1.13, and these are the number of days. Now, paddock 6, which we set out as our best paddock, it's been had pastures sown into it. We're going to spend 52.5 days in there, and at that point you go, oh my God, my cows won't last, or my sheep won't last 52 days in the paddock. Okay, so what are you going to do about it? This is where possibly subdivision comes in, and if you could chop that up into 5 paddocks, then they're only going to spend 10 days in each. You're going to improve the feed that goes through them, so they're not eating really good stuff and then eating really bad stuff. You get the advantages of more animal impact. Okay, so even though we've got this figure of 52 days, and most people throw up their arms in horror, it says to you, what are you going to do about it? If 52 days is too much for you, too much for the animals, how can we get around it? If you haven't got temporary fencing and you just can't do the temporary fencing bit, you might say, well, okay, I'm going to put them in there for the whole paddock, let's say for 40 days, and they're just going to eat the ice cream, and then they're going to get onto the really poor quality feed. So the last 10, 12 days, I'm going to be supplementing and giving them that extra bit. So these are all decisions we can come up with, or choices we can come up with once we've got that figure. Ideally to me, let's go and strip graze it, get the animal impact, spread the dung, and make it even more productive. So the same with the drought reserve. Again, it's a big figure. You might be saying to yourself, well, if we get to that point, I need to go and subdivide that. So here are your actual graze figures now, for the non-growing and for the drought. Any thoughts, any questions thus far? All good to keep on trapping? Great, excellent. Okay, so now we've got this picture of everything that's happening on the farm. Okay, well, one thing I hadn't put in was school holidays. So let's put in some school holidays there, because we like the kids to come and help us with the temporary fencing. So when do school holidays start? This side of the island, they start on the 18th, 5, 10, 15, 20, 18th of December. And they go back just after Australia Day. So again, down the bottom here, we can just put in school holidays. So now generally, we know how many days we're going to spend in each paddock. We now have a look at the big picture, and often we work backwards. We say we've got to be in a paddock for a particular reason, okay? And so I'm going to be suggesting, now we can't be in this paddock here because we want the contractor to be saying so, and we want to be in this paddock here because of the small calves and not wanting to move them. And also, let's say we want the kids to help us with strip grazing, temporary fencing when they're in this really good paddock, because they're going to be in there for 52 days. So we've got this opportunity to do some strip grazing, especially when the kids are home from school. So let's plan to graze this first. As I said, we're going to be in there for 52 days. So the way we've planned the grazing, and this is where we use pencil. I'm using ink so you can just see it, but let's use pencil because guaranteed there's going to be some changes, some differences there. So 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 36, 41, 53. And again, this is done in pencil because there will be some chops and changes. You might suddenly decide, let's take two selections, or you might need to go somewhere else, or the animals might bust out the fence. So do this in pencil, but that there will give us the best performance from the animals, but it's also getting the animals in the right place to prepare it for the sowing of the seed there. Okay. And then we don't have a clutter later on.
Ryan, what you were saying about you strip grazing that paddock and getting the kids to help you, given that they're still at school for those first 3 weeks and they're not going to be able to help out, does it make any sense to just have them have animals run in the full paddock for a few weeks, then start strip grazing on top of that, or is that sort of a waste of effort? Again,
you're going to run into the effect where they're going to take off the ice cream, they're going to spread dung and urine all over the paddocks, then you bring them back on there. So, you might have a worm issue. Now, where possible, so let's fence off enough time for those 15 days. And then once the kids come back, we can strip graze for the rest of the period.
So you might,
if you've got the record, as long as you don't strip graze the same piece every year, and let's chop it up and change it and switch it around.
Okay, so you just set up a temporary fence for 3 weeks over a third of that area or whatever, and then you can strip graze the rest. Yeah. Okay.
Again, this is all just kind of sounds like a good idea in my head. Fantastic. Okay, so at this point, you'd all have your maps out and you'd be saying, well, how do we get from here to there? I don't have a map for this place because it's still sitting in my head. But let's assume all these paddocks come back to a central water point and a yard. So it's really easy to move them through these paddocks. Okay, so for this example, let's assume they all come in. So we're not really worried about how you get them from A to B. But, when you're doing your planning, really important to have that map out with all the paddocks marked, where the gates are, so you can work out that you're not moving animals huge distances. Because again, that's going to knock your performance. It's going to cost you time, money, and stress yourself and the animals out. So for this little case study, dead easy. I'm going to say, right, where are we going to next? We really want to be, let's go up into paddock 3. Paddock 3 looks like a good one. We're going to be there for a long period of time, which is great. And paddock 3, we said we're going to be in for 26 days. So here we go. We've got 3, 8, 9, 19, 24, 26 days. Where are we going to from there? Well, we want to graze this out. But I'm going to suggest let's just slip down to the bottom here. Let's go into paddock 5. We've said we're going to be in paddock 5 for 3 and a bit days. So there we go, 3 days there. Then we can come up and graze this paddock here. We're going for 3 and a bit days. And then we've only really got 2 paddocks left. We've got paddocks 2 for 1 day and paddocks 3 for 3 days, which we're going to slip in here somewhere. Let's go in here for the 1 and a bit, and then we're in there for the 3. Okay. And then we can repeat the performance for the drought. Again, let's go in here. These seeds, if we've had the rain, we won't be coming back here, but we can go back if we haven't had the rain. This is the drought reserve. We're going to be in here for 18 days, 5, 10, 15, 16, 17, 18 days there. And without any complexity here, I'm just going to follow the previous pattern because that'll give us the longest distance between animals coming out and animals going in again. So here we're going to be in for 9 days, 2, 7, 9. And then we came down to here. And we're going to be there for 1 and a bit days. And then we're going up to there for 1 and a bit days. And then we've got 1 and a bit days in both those 2 paddocks. So, basically there's the plan. It's all done in pencil. If something changes, the rain starts early, you find this is just too long, or the animals bust out of there, it's just a case of rubbing it out and reassessing, because 99% of the time plans don't go as we predict them, especially if you're dealing with complexity like grazing animals. So really hang on to this little framework here. We create the plan, and the power of planning is what we've just done. Bringing in all those factors, putting them down, working our way through it. But the minute we put our pencil down and say, right, the plan is done, it's just become a piece of paper. Success towards your context now relies on monitoring and controlling, making those little adjustments. We're stuffed up. We don't have that many animal days of feed. The cows are bellowing. It's all about monitoring. So again, what do we monitor? Certainly animal behavior is the key. Animals that aren't chewing their cud, aren't lying down or walking fences, hanging on waters, all of those things are really good indicators. I would have shared with you sort of, the rumen fill for cattle. Sheep, you can't really see it unless they've just been shorn. But again, we should be there in the middle somewhere by 10 o'clock in the morning. If you're getting changes there, you need to change management. Again, dung scoring, fantastic way of checking out. And again, we should be 3s and 4s. If you find yourself heading down here towards 5s, the feed quality is dropping. So these are great monitoring points long before you start losing condition off the animals. And a nice thing to do is once you take the animals out of the paddock for the non-growing period, you should have left enough feed in there for your drought reserve. So when you take your animals out from your non-growing period, you should be able to look back in the paddock, and whether you're using visuals like this, or go out there and do a feed square, you should be able to be comfortable with yourself that what you've left behind is enough for that drought reserve. And again, that all just comes down to good monitoring, and monitoring is where success lies. We get really hooked up on the planning side, and it's nice. Plans are pretty, they're good colors and what have you, but at the end of the day, it all relies on monitoring. We're dealing with animals, we're dealing with weather, we're dealing with environments, we're dealing with people. We need a good plan. So, there are a couple more steps there, and they're basically monitoring steps in the Aide. So I'm not going to go there. This is basically where I wanted to end off the session. Thoughts, questions, ideas?
Louis, I wanted to ask Louis, because I remember when we had the field day at your place early in the year, you said you found it really frustrating because you were changing your plan so much that you were virtually almost wearing out your paper. Did I get the wrong impression about that, or was that one of your concerns, and why is that been bugging you?
No, I don't recall saying anything like that, and I don't have any issue with the constantly adjusting. My biggest issue, I've gone away from the temporary electric fencing. My biggest bugbear has been the amount of time and effort that it takes to run that out.
Yeah.
And I'm much more inclined to permanent fencing, but just 2 wires and a spacing of at least 20 metres between star pickets.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And single strainers. The single biggest advance in fencing, in my opinion, in the last 100 years is being able to auger a 6-foot deep hole and put a single pole into that 6-foot hole and not require any box assembly or strut or anything. I can pull as much strain against a Wandoo strainer that's 6 foot in the ground as I could possibly pull. It's
Fantastic.
it's huge time saving, and if I could justify a thumper, a Munro post driver, then I could just drill a pilot hole 6 foot deep and knock the strainer into that and get no movement at all.
Okay.
So again, there's lots of cool stuff happening out there, and again, I reckon it won't take long. Just in that virtual fencing will be practical. It just needs people to give it a try and test it and figure it out.
The monitoring is also a really interesting aspect of that too, because one of the reasons for the virtual fencing, for me at least, is that I'm not on site. I want to monitor from a distance. So, like, I'm really keen to see whether we can track things like you're describing, animals roaming the fences, or seeing changes in just the location of the animals and how they're socializing or whatever. Not just looking for feed quality, but also looking for signs of disease or other distress. That's sort of one thing I'm really keen to explore further. But
I mean, that the actual tracking devices, I mean, just like your car things you get today, they're pretty basic.
Yeah.
It's the fencing side that's actually put a bit of strain on the technology. It's using a lot more energy, and it needs to be a lot more, I suppose, complex.
Yeah. Let's sort of give you a position of the animal every 10 minutes and presumably approximate where how far it's traveled in that 10 minutes.
Yeah.
You don't have a detailed path of where it's gone, but even a 10-minute point location probably give you quite a lot of information about how your herd is tracking.
Yeah. And automatically throw up, warnings.
Yeah.
Again, there's a lot of technology out there. Maya and these. Anybody using computer programs, Maya or anything like that? Again, they're fantastic for doing, all the maths. They're great for recording, but I don't know. Maybe I'm old-fashioned or something, but when you sit around a table with a piece of paper and a pencil saying, what if we move them this way, or what if we move them that way? That really brings out the creativity, and people can sit around and be engaged in that. When Kerry and I sit around the computer trying to do the finances or something, it frustrates the hell out of me because I can't get involved. You're cricking your neck to see what's going on. So the paper is great. It's a great communication tool. It's great for creativity. Once you've got it on the paper, if you need to transfer it onto the electronic stuff again, I'd say fantastic. Some people have a manager. They live in town, and it's a great way of just understanding what's happening. I wouldn't say communicating again, because the computer program will say we've just moved from here to there, and we've just consumed $650,000 or animal days of feed or whatever it is, and it's 25% of what's in the paddock. It doesn't really communicate. It tells people what's going on. So, and at the end of the day, that sheet of paper is $1.50 or $1.60. It's difficult to beat that kind of value as a communication and planning tool. It's just fantastic. It really is. And it's, it literally has stood the test of time. A couple of 100 years with the British military, and now it's had I suppose almost 60 years out there with livestock. And people fail to do it. But if you do it, how can it fail? It can't. You know, you put in the information, you just follow the process. It's as easy as that. So that's all I had for us this afternoon. How long has that taken us? Ooh, 2 hours. Yeah, and this kind of thing, you probably do it twice a year. And you know, if you're doing your own place, and Lou, yeah, keen to see your stuff when you got it cranked out there. And if you have any problems, again, if you need any resources or need to have a chat, please feel free to give us a call, drop us an email or line, and I'll find some time. Otherwise, all good. Any other final questions before we knock off?
No, thank you very much, Brian, for the opportunity.
Great having you guys on board. Thanks, Peter.
Right.
Good stuff.
Thank you very
No.
I'll probably get the recording out tonight or tomorrow. And again, please, if there are any things you need to go over again, please just get in touch and we'll make a plan.
Excellent.
Excellent.
Thank you, Brian.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Brian.
Enjoy the seasons.